Hello and welcome to my podcast. I'm Alden Carrow, author of Cumbria In Verse, Lakes to Fells in Poetry. This show is about slowing down, listening closely, and discovering the poetry that lives in both the extraordinary and the everyday. Each episode, I begin with a guest poem, something from the wider world of poetry that has inspired me or continues to resonate. Then I'll invite you, the listeners, to suggest future guest poems, and after that, I'll share one of my own pieces too. Today, we're exploring the concept of constriction and flow. We often think of the landscape as a painting, a static backdrop against which our lives play out. But anyone who has lived in a valley or near a river that tends to rise knows that the land is an active participant. It pushes back, it squeezes us, it dictates the boundaries of our movement. There is a tension between the human desire to control, to build, to pave, and the natural force that seeks to reclaim that space. This is the friction where poetry often lives, in that uncomfortable, damp space between the dry stone wall and the rising water. To explore this, I wanted to turn to one of the great observers of the English rural landscape, John Clare. Clare is often celebrated as the poet of the open field, the man who grieved the Enclosures Act, which fenced off the commons and restricted the movement of both people and nature. He's the poet of the bird's nest, the badger, the specific, minute details of the hedgerow. But Clare also understood the violence of nature. He understood that the land wasn't just a victim of human enclosure. It's also a force capable of its own overwhelming power. When the waters rise, the fences mean nothing. The boundaries we draw on maps are dissolved by the reality of mud and silt. I have chosen his sonnet, The Flood. It's a poem that captures a moment of terrifying transformation, where the familiar, safe structures of village life are suddenly rendered alien and dangerous by the sheer weight of water. It speaks to that feeling of helplessness when the elements decide to move. John Clare's The Flood is one of his most vivid and tempestuous landscape poems, a piece in which the natural world refuses to sit quietly as scenery and instead becomes a force of personality, memory and awe. Written from his intimate knowledge of the Northamptonshire countryside, the poem captures a moment of raw encounter, the poet standing on Lolland Briggs, watching winter waters surge with a kind of wild intelligence. Clare transforms the flood into a living presence, playful, violent, stubborn, and strangely purposeful, its movements echoing both the rhythms of the land and the turbulence of human feeling. What begins as observation becomes immersion as the speaker is drawn into the drama of ice crashing, arches trembling, debris spinning, and waves rising like mythic creatures. The poem's energy is relentless, yet threaded with Clare's characteristic tenderness for the overlooked. Straws, feathers, uprooted rails, all swept into the same restless journey. In this introduction to the poem, I invite you to experience the flood not merely as weather or event, but as a metaphor for endurance, fragility, and the ceaseless motion of life itself. On Lolland Briggs in wild and lonely mood, I've seen the winter floods their gambols play. Through each old arch that trembled while I stood, bent o'er its walls to watch the dashing spray. As their old stations would be washed away, crash came the ice against the jambs, and then a shudder jarred the arches yet once more. it breasted raving waves and stood again, to wait the shock, stubborn as before. White foam brown crested with the russet soil, as washed from new plough lands would dart beneath. Then round and round 1,000 eddies boil, on t'other side then pause as if for breath. 1 minute and engulfed like life in death. Whose wrecky stains dart on the floods away, more swift than shadows in a stormy day. Straws trail and turn and steady all in vain, the engulfing arches shoot them quickly through. The feather dances, flutters and again darts through the deepest dangers still afloat, seeming as fairies whisked it from the view, and danced it o'er the waves as pleasure's boat. Light-hearted as a thought in May, trays upturned bushes, fence demolished rails, loaded with weeds in sluggish motion stray, like water monsters lost each winds and trails, till near the arches, then as in a fright, it plunges, reels and shudders out of sight. Waves trough, rebound and fury boil again, like plunging monsters rising underneath, who at the top curl up a shaggy mane, a moment catching at a surer breath, then plunging headlong down and on. Each following boil the shadow of the last, and other monsters rise when those are gone. Crest their fringed waves plunge onward and are past. The chill air comes around me, ocean blay. From bank to bank the water strife is spread. Strange birds like snow spots o'er the huzzing sea hang where the wild duck hurried past and fled. On roars the flood, all restless to be free, like trouble wandering to eternity. John Clare's The Flood is a vivid, kinetic meditation on the overwhelming power of water in flood and the fragile endurance of human structures set against it. The poem's central drama lies in the tension between the solidity of the bridge and the restless, almost sentient force of the water torrents that assault it. Clare transforms the landscape into a theatre of pressure and resistance, where the bridge becomes a stubborn survivor and the flood a shape-shifting antagonist. From the opening lines, the speaker positions himself as witness to a wild, elemental spectacle. The winter floods do not merely flow, they play their gambols, a phrase that gives the water an unsettling, mischievous energy and agency. The arches trembled beneath the poet's feet, establishing the precariousness of human engineering in the face of natural violence. Ice crashes against the stone jambs, sending a shudder through the structure, yet the bridge stood again, a phrase that captures both its resilience and its vulnerability. This interplay between endurance and threat becomes the poem's emotional core. Clare's imagery is richly physical. The water is thick with white foam, brown crested with the russet soil, a reminder that the flood is not pure but charged with the land it tears apart. Eddies boil, pause as if for breath, then engulf debris like life in death. The simile underscores the poem's fascination with the thin line between motion and obliteration, vitality and erasure. Everything caught in the current, straws, feathers, uprooted bushes, broken rails, becomes a symbol of human and natural fragility, swept into the same indifferent churn. The poem's second movement intensifies this sense of helplessness. Light objects such as feathers seem to dance across the surface as if guided by fairies, but this momentary grace is deceptive. The arches shoot them quickly through, reminding the reader that the flood's power is absolute. Heavier debris moves with a sluggish, monstrous presence, only to be dragged under in a moment of affright. Clare's language repeatedly blurs the boundary between animate and inanimate, giving the flood a mythic, creaturely quality. In the final stanza, the water becomes a host of plunging monsters, rising and collapsing in endless succession. The landscape widens into something oceanic, from bank to bank, and the air grows ocean blue, as though the land itself is being temporarily erased. Birds appear as snow spots above the turmoil, emphasizing the scale and violence of the scene. The closing line, like trouble wandering to eternity, casts the flood as a metaphor for ceaseless unrest, a force both physical and existential. Through this, Clare elevates a local event into a universal meditation on turbulence, endurance, and the relentless pressures of the natural world. Moving from the flooded plains of Clare's Northamptonshire, I want to take us north to the landscape that shapes my own writing, the Lake District, specifically the town of Ambleside. If you've ever visited the lakes, you know that the geography there is aggressive. It's not a rolling, gentle landscape. It's a collision of rock and water. The towns are not sprawled out, they're wedged in. They're forced into the valleys, squeezed between the fells and the lakes. Ambleside, in particular, sits in a kind of funnel. To the north, the Kirkstone Pass pours traffic and weather down into the town. To the south, Windermere waits to catch it all. And on the other side, the fells of Wansfall and Lothrig loom high, creating a trough, a stone throat. I wanted to write about this feeling of being squeezed. We often talk about the beauty of the lakes, but there's also a claustrophobia to it, especially in the height of tourist season or the depth of a dark winter. The landscape dictates everything. Where the roads go, where the water flows, and how the light hits or misses the roofs. The poem I'm going to share is called Ambleside, the Stone Funnel. I wrote this after spending a few days researching the town's transition from the frantic energy of summer tourism to the strange damp quiet of autumn. I was struck by how the town functions like a machine, or perhaps more accurately, like a geological drain. Everything flows down. The rain, the cars, the hikers, the money. It all tumbles down the steep slopes and accumulates in the valley floor before washing into the lake. But there's a resistance there too. The stone of the buildings, that heavy grey slate, seems to be holding its breath, bracing against the flow. The bridge house, a tiny 17th century structure built right over the beck, became a focal point for me. It stands there, stubborn and small, while the modern world chokes around it. This poem is about that tension, the unstoppable flow of water and people, and the immovable, crushing weight of the rock. So here it is, Ambleside, the Stone Funnel. Wansfell presses in, a heavy, moss-slit gate, and Lothrig casts the early shadow. Geology is a closing throat here, volcanic Borrowdale rock that breaks the spade, the nail, the will. We live in the squeeze of it. Rough walls hold back the damp, that eternal, claggy breath of the hill, under roofs of graduated slate, laid heavy as ballast. Even the bridge house, that little apple store ghost, stands stubborn on its 2-arch span, watching the traffic choke. Then the rain comes, Stockgill cuts the boundary, a nervous thread, swelling, breaking, spitting white noise over the lip, ignoring the pavement, reminding the tarmac that this is a mountain drain first and a market town second. Iron signs creak. The day trippers in their synthetic skins, bright blues and neon pinks against the grey, hunt for desire lines scoured in the fell. They pour down the Kirkstone, a silt of cash and Gore-Tex settling in the valley floor. Then September. The tourists ebb and the scholars flood, up to the old Mason Hall. A tide of fresh boots on the wet sets, caught between the dry stone and the weight of new debts. It all runs down to the pier. Timber piles mark the water's slow, cold shift, where the road finally gives up and dissolves into the grey of the lake. The sun drops behind the fell side, hours before the clocks say it should, leaving us waiting in the cool, uneven rime. In writing this poem, I wanted to capture the physical sensation of the valley. The opening line, Wansfale presses in, sets the tone. The mountains here aren't distant, they're immediate. They press against the windows, they shorten the day. When I say geology is a closing throat, I'm thinking about how the glaciers carved this landscape, creating these narrow passages that we now try to inhabit. It feels tight. It feels like the earth is swallowing the town. The graduated slate is a detail I love about Cumbrian architecture. The stones are largest at the eaves and get smaller towards the ridge. It's a practical design for shedding heavy rain, but metaphorically, it adds to this sense of weight. The roofs are laid heavy as ballast, anchoring the houses against the wind, keeping them from washing away in the flow. I also wanted to explore the human flow which mimics the water. The tourists in their synthetic skins, the Gore-Tex. The waterproofs are a river of their own. They flow down the Kirkstone Pass, just like the silt. I use the phrase silt of cash and Gore-Tex to suggest that tourism is a form of sediment. It settles in the valley, enriching it financially, but also clogging it, changing the ecosystem. The transition to September brings a different tide, the students. Ambleside is a university town, which is a strange anomaly for such a small, rural place. The scholars' flood replaces the tourists. It's a cyclical wash, a tide of fresh brutes and new debts. The town is never empty, it's just filled with different fluids, different currents. And then finally, the light. The most profound constriction in a deep valley is the loss of light. The sun drops behind the fell side hours before the clocks say it should. There's a theft of time that happens in the mountains. You're left in the shadow, in the cool, uneven rime, while the rest of the world might still be enjoying the sunset. It emphasises that we are living on the mountain's schedule, not our own. The landscape dictates the terms of our existence, right down to the hours of daylight we're allotted. For our discussion segment today, I want to shift gears from the physical landscape to the digital one. Just as we navigate the valleys and fells, we also have to navigate the online spaces where we share our work. And lately, there's been a significant migration, a shifting of the tides in the world of online poetry. I want to talk about Bluesky and specifically how it represents a new kind of open field for writers and poets, distinct from the crowded, algorithmic city squares we've been used to. For years, many of us gathered on Twitter. It was the town square. But over time, that square became noisy. The algorithm began to prioritise outrage over art, engagement bait over genuine connection. It felt like standing in the middle of a busy highway trying to recite a sonnet. The noise-to-signal ratio became impossible. It was a constriction of creativity, a feeling that you had to shout to be heard, or worse, that you had to be angry to be seen. Enter Bluesky. If you haven't joined yet, or if you're just dipping your toes in, the atmosphere is strikingly different. If the old place was a shouting match, Bluesky feels like a series of interconnected quiet rooms, or perhaps a large, sprawling pub where you can actually hear the person sitting next to you. From a marketing perspective, and I know marketing is a dirty word for many poets, Bluesky offers something refreshing. It operates on the AT protocol, which is decentralized. But what does that mean for us, the writers? It means the platform isn't trying to force-feed you content to make you angry. It allows you to create your own experience through feeds. There's a poetry feed, a Booksky feed, a nature writing feed. These are community-built algorithms. And this is crucial. It means that if you write about the landscape, you can plug directly into a stream of people who want to read about the landscape. You're not fighting against political bots or viral videos. You're simply stepping into a room full of like-minded souls. So how do we use this for promoting our books? The key I've found is to abandon the megaphone mentality. On Bluesky, the hard sell doesn't work well. Buy my book gets lost. What works is the starter pack mentality. Bluesky allows users to create starter packs. These are lists of users centered around a theme. I've seen packs for UK poets, indie publishers, nature photographers. By engaging with these packs, by sharing them, by being part of them, you build visibility through community, not through volume. It's about returning to the idea of a gift economy. Share a poem by someone else. Post a photo of where you write. Discuss the process of editing. On Bluesky, the engagement feels stickier, more sincere. When someone replies, they're usually starting a conversation, not dropping a drive-by comment. For an author, this is gold. We're looking for readers, yes, but really we're looking for relationships. We're looking for the people who will stick with us for the long haul. The slow growth on a platform like Bluesky is worth 10 times the viral spike on a platform like TikTok, because the people you find are the ones who actually care about the written word. I think of it like the difference between a flash flood and a steady irrigation channel. A viral post is a flood. It's exciting, but it recedes quickly and leaves a mess. Building a presence on Bluesky is like digging an irrigation ditch. It takes time, it's quiet work, but eventually it brings life to the field. It sustains the career. If you're feeling burnt out by the demands of digital marketing, by the need to create content rather than art, I encourage you to look at these new, quieter spaces. There's a sense of blue sky there, a clearing in the digital weather where we can sit down, open a book, and actually read to one another again. Now you've listened to one of my poems and I've outlined the benefits of using Bluesky, I'd love to hear from you. If there's a poem you'd like me to feature as a guest poem in a future episode, email me at aldencarrow78@gmail.com. That's aldencarrow78@gmail.com. It could be a classic, something modern, or even a personal favourite that means a lot to you. This way, the podcast becomes a shared journey. So thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, May you find the poetry in the everyday, and I'll speak to you again on Wednesday.